Good evening, everyone, and called the Winnebago County Board meeting to order. Tonight is Thursday, September 30th, 2021. And our invocation and pledge allegiance shall be given by Mr. Jaime Salgado. Mr. Salgado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Heavenly Father, I'd like to first thank you for bringing us together here today. I also want to thank you for protecting us and keeping us safe. Heavenly Father, I ask that you grant us your knowledge, wisdom, and as we make decisions on behalf of the Winnebago County residents. I also ask that you protect our first responders, military personnel, and their families as they put their lives on the line each and every day for us. In your name, Jesus, amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thank you, Mr. Salgado. Mr. Thompson, is there any adjustments to the agenda this evening?
Not this evening, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to roll call. Clerk Gamal, can you please call the roll?
Certainly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Lindmark? Mr. McCarthy? Mr. McDonald? Mr. Neighbors? Mrs. Red? Mr. Salgado? Mr. Schultz? Mr. Tassoni? Mr. Webster? Mr. Westcott? Mr. Rena? Mr. Billich? Mr. Booker? Mr. Butita? Mrs. Crosby? Ms. Fellers? Mr. Gurl? Mrs. Gorel? Mr. Hoffman? Mr. Kelly? Mr. Chairman, 17 board members present, 3 absent.
Thank you. All right, we'll move on to awards, presentations, public hearing, and public participation. I don't believe we have any awards this evening, presentations, public hearings, but we do have public participation. So I'm going to read the statement because we do have 2 speakers this evening. Okay, all comments shall be limited to 3 minutes. Speakers may not address zoning matters which are pending before the ZBA, zoning committee, or the county board. Personnel matters or pending or threatened litigation may not be addressed in open session. An individual may speak a maximum of 3 times per calendar year on the same topic. This prohibition shall include the repetition of the same topic in a statement on what is purported to be a different topic. Personal attacks or inappropriate language of any sort will not be tolerated. So our first speaker I'd like to call up is Mr. Bob Campbell.
Good evening. I am Bob Campbell, the Executive Director of Zion Development Corporation, based in the Midtown neighborhood here in Rockford. Zion has developed 150 units of affordable housing and currently manages 130 units in Midtown, as well as the strong neighborhood houses that are located in Midtown, Ellis Heights, and McChesney Park. I'm here to speak in opposition to the resolution to opt out of the preferential assessment for affordable rental housing and new construction. I should say that I absolutely hate speaking in forums like this, but this issue is very significant to Zion and to, we believe, our community. Zion has a long track record of managing affordable housing for some of the hardest to house people in the region. We are currently preparing to close on financing for a $15 million rehabilitation of our seniors building in Rockford. We have 3 additional projects that are currently in Winnebago that are in pre-development. The ownership structure for our current project will not allow us to qualify for property tax benefits in spite of the fact that we are a not-for-profit organization. This is common for tax credit projects due to the layers of investors and financing involved in such projects. Between our current and planned projects, opting out of the preferential assessment will result in reductions of about $2 million in construction contracts over the next few years just from Zion's planned work. It will also make Winnebago County less competitive for tax credit deals, such as the one that we are working on, reducing the county's ability to house low-income elderly and disabled populations. Any landlord with a property of at least 7 units can participate in this program. Most of the landlords that would do this would also participate in other programs, such as the Rental Housing Support Program or Section 8. While some people have expressed concerns about monitoring properties that receive the benefit, these programs that many landlords would participate in already require annual inspections and reviews. It is common for us to share the reviews that we have and the evaluations that we have from one agency to another, and that can simply be done with the assessor's office as well. As I stated, any landlord can participate in this program, but none are required to. The legislation has an opt-out already in place, but that opt-out occurs at the property ownership level. The resolution that you are considering does not have any impact on landlords that do not want to participate in the first place. It will only limit landlords that could otherwise benefit from the preferential assessment. It only reduces our ability to house the hardest to house populations that already live in our county. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Campbell. Our next speaker is Mr. L.C. Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And no, I don't miss this. I'm here to really praise your chairman. I asked him if he would come to an event at AARC Booker, Washington, and speak, and he did so this past Saturday in honor of the senior boomers and the path that was dedicated, and to the American Legion Post 340. So I want to say this publicly. Thank you for that. By all means. The second thing I want to do is thank Fred Westcott for showing up reading some literature that was given by Dave Severson, Senator Dave Severson. And I want you to know I appreciate what you did as well. And now I've got to tell you about an announcement. The other reason I showed up, there will be a Top of Illinois Veterans Stand Down October 29th from 9 a.m. to noon at the Nordloff Theater, 118 North Main Street. Veterans can show up with a DD-214 or their Veterans ID, small card. I get one in my pocket. They will receive, after entering, free haircuts, free flu shots. COVID-19 shot will be offered as well. Clothing will be given. Rockford Mass Transit District has also allowed veterans to ride the bus free, Rockford Mass Transit District. So that's my announcement, but I got to say this before I leave, and that's, I'll be here a little bit. I'd like to say hi to my brother, Jim Webster. I used to have your back. I don't know who got it now. You got his back. The Veteran Stand Down. I'm going to leave this information so it can be shared throughout the county.
We'll make sure it gets shared.
And before I go, I got to say this too. Joe Hoffman, I miss you, but.
Mr. Webster? Thank you, L.C.
Yeah. Thank you for the kind words there, LC. LC and I got sworn in at the very same time, so we were brothers in arms, so to speak, for all those years, and brothers in humanity, really. But the one thing that LC said, when you get sworn in, you know, you can say a few words or whatever, and I think we were both so nervous, you know, didn't know what to say, but what LC said has stuck with me all these years. He said, "This is a big old county. We just all got to learn how to live in it." And I remember those words still.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, LC. Thank you, Mr. Webster. All right, we'll move on to proclamations. All right, can Danielle Angelari come up? And if you have anyone with you, please come up. So Danielle Angelari is from NAMI, Northern Illinois, and who's with you? Melissa. Very good, thank you. All right, so this evening we have a proclamation in recognition of Mental Illness Awareness Week, which is October 3rd through the 9th, 2021. Whereas mental health is part of overall health, and whereas mental health helps sustain an individual's thought processes, relationships, productivity, and ability to adapt to change and face adversity. Mental illness adversely affects those abilities and often is life-threatening in nature. And whereas 1 in 5 adults experiences mental health problems in any given year, and such problems can contribute to the onset of mental illness. 1 in 17 adults live with mental illness, such as a major depression, bipolar disorder, or schizophrenia. And whereas approximately 1/2 of chronic mental illness begins by the age of 14 and 3/4 by age 24. And whereas long delays, sometimes decades, often occur between the time symptoms first appear and when an individual gets help. Early identification and treatment can make a profound difference in the successful management of mental illness and recovery. And whereas it is important to maintain mental health and learn the symptoms of mental illness in order to get the help when it is needed. And whereas every citizen and community can make a difference in helping end the silence and stigma that for too long has surrounded mental illness and discouraged people from getting the help they deserve and need. And whereas public education and civic activities can encourage mental health and improve the lives of individuals and families affected by mental illness. Now therefore be it resolved, I, Joseph V. Shirelli, Chairman of Winnebago County Board, do hereby proclaim October 3rd through October 9th, 2021 as Mental Illness Awareness Week in Winnebago County. I encourage all citizens to rally support for all individuals affected by mental illness. Thank you.
I just wanted to say to you all, thank you for supporting NAMI and organizations that also give direct services to people living with mental illness. We really do a lot in the support, education, awareness realm, offering hope. We have a bunch of events next week if you're interested, and I don't know if you want me to pass it out or we can leave it back there if you'd like to join us. So thank you again.
Yes. Mr. Tim.
I'd like to thank Danielle Angelari for all the work that she does for mental health, and with NAMI, I don't know if everyone knows this already, but she's also a member of our Winnebago County Mental Health Board, and she does an excellent job, and I just want to thank her again.
Yes, great. Thank you, Mr. Peters. All right, we'll proceed. Can I entertain a motion to approve the minutes of August 19th and 26th, 2021, and lay over the September 9th, 2021 minutes? Mr. Billich motions, and Ms. Feller seconds that motion. Is there any discussion on the motion? Hearing and seeing none, are there any board members opposed to that motion? Seeing none, please cast a yes vote for all members present. Number 7, can I entertain a motion for the consent agenda? Mr. Neighbors motions to approve. Mr. Hoffman seconds the motion. Is there any discussion? Seeing and hearing none, are there any board members opposed to that motion to approve? Very good. Seeing none, all votes cast yes, please. We move on to appointments. So we have, I'm going to read in for the first reading. All appointments require a 30-day layover unless there's a suspension of a rule. We have the Pecatonica Cemetery Association. The compensation was not available for us to know, which I don't believe there is any compensation. First is Elizabeth Betsy Dottie. That is a reappointment for Pecatonica, Illinois. And the second grouping is for the Rockford Hebrew Cemetery Association. Also, the compensation was not available and unknown. We have David Sklar as a reappointment. Dr. Stephen Geller, that was a reappointment. We have Stephen Lertzman, that's a new appointment. Goldie Pekarski, that's a new appointment. And Terry Gordon is a new appointment to the Hebrew Cemetery Association. So those will be automatically laid over for 30 days. Next, we move on to reports of standing committees. First committee will be Finance Committee and Mr. Salgado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's quite a few items. I'm going to go a little bit out of order, if you don't mind, and actually start with our unfinished business, get that out of the way, and proceed onto the new committee, Finance Committee.
Very good.
So the first item is item A, our ordinance to opt out of the preferential assessment for affordable rental housing construction. That was laid over back in September 9th, 2021 meeting. After hearing multiple county board members, it is suggested if we could lay this over for further discussion on this or any questions that still need to be addressed on this matter. So I'd motion to lay this over the next county board meeting.
Okay, we have a motion to lay over. Is that a second, Mr. Arena? Okay. We have a motion and a second to lay over, and Mr. Arena would like a discussion. Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I suggest we lay this over for 2 cycles, a month, so that the taxing bodies who are affected by this have an opportunity to meet and decide for themselves what we'd like to do. So if we could possibly amend the motion for layover till October 28th.
Layover till October 28th meeting. Is that correct?
Right, or postpone, yeah, however we want to phrase it, yes. Thank you.
Okay. Are you agreeable to that, Mr. Salgado?
That is agreeable,
Okay,
yes.
so the motion is to lay over till October 28th meeting. Ms. Gorel, seconds? Yep, very good, thank you. Is there any discussion on the layover? I believe Ms. Fellers.
We'll just send it back to committee instead so that we could gather the information from the various taxing bodies and then discuss it in Finance Committee. That way that information could be presented to the board at whole before we vote on it.
We certainly can. In this case, I will take back my motion to lay over, and I would suggest Ms. Fellers to motion
I'd like to make a motion to send it back to committee.
Send it back to Finance Committee.
Finance Committee.
Okay, so there's a motion to send this item back to Finance Committee. Mr. Arena.
So I don't think that the fact that we postpone it here still gives us the opportunity to talk about it. My point was I wanted the taxing bodies to have an opportunity to discuss, so finance would happen, well, I don't know, I guess maybe it would just push it out further, but it seems like a more complex topic with that's going to warrant extensive conversation. Finance committees tend to be busy. I don't know if it'll get the amount of attention it deserves there, but we could schedule a special finance committee, but I don't think it's necessary to send it back to committee to do what we need to do. But I'll defer to what the majority wants to do on that point. As long as we give everybody the opportunity to weigh in. I think is what's
So your intention for the layover originally was to get the taxing bodies, get them surveyed and polled to talk to them about this resolution, correct?
right. So they weigh
Right.
in, and the ones I've spoken to say, "What do you think?" They're, they express concern, but say, "Well, we have to talk about it as a board," and their meetings are going to occur sometime during the month of October.
Okay, very
So-
good. Ms. Crosby?
Motion to send it back to committee for two reasons. I think we really killed two birds with one stone. We give taxing bodies an opportunity to meet and then give us feedback into finance, and then we can come forward with a recommendation. So I support sending it back to committee.
All right, very good. Thank you, Ms. Crosby. Any other discussion on that? Okay. Are there any board members opposed to the motion to lay this over and send it back to Finance Committee? Yes. Ms. Gorel, second. Correct. So there, I see or hear no opposition to that motion. Okay, cast a yes for all board members present. Thank you. Mr. Salgado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The next item is a budget amendment, Sheriff's Office budget amendment that was laid over in September 9th, so I move to approve budget amendment for the Sheriff's Office.
So motion by Mr. Salgado, second by Mr. McDonald. Mr. Salgado, is there any discussion?
Yeah, just let you guys know the budget amount was $681,897 was the budget amendment regarding the increase to their budget for 2021.
Is there any other discussion? Clerk Gama, can you please call the roll?
Mr. McCarthy, Mr. McDonald, Mr. Neighbors, Mrs. Red, Mr. Salgado,
Yes.
Mr. Schultz, Mr. Tassoni, Mr. Webster, Mr. Westcott, Mr. Arena, Mr. Billich, Mr. Booker, Mr. Butita, Mrs. Crosby, Ms. Fellers, Mr. Gurl, Mrs. Gorel, Mr. Hoffman. Mr. Chairman, 18 yes, 2 board members absent.
Thank you. Budget amendment has been approved. Mr. Salgado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Item C, I'm going to skip over, and there's a logic reason why. I'll explain that when we get there once. Obviously, that goes in hand with our current approval of budget ordinances that will be coming for 2022 on next. So I'll skip that for now. Next item is an ordinance establishing civil fees, criminal traffic assessments to be charged by the circuit clerk. This was laid over from September 9th meeting, and so I move to approve this.
Mr. Salgado motions to approve. Mr. Gurl seconds that motion. Is there any discussion, Mr. Salgado, from yourself or any other members?
No, it was just copy fee increases. That's really all that was for.
Very good. Clerk Gamal, can you please call the roll?
Mr. McDonald, Mr. Neighbors, Mrs. Red, Mr. Salgado,
Yes.
Mr. Schultz, Mr. Tassoni, Mr. Webster, Mr. Westcott, Mr. Arena, Mr. Billich, Mr. Booker, Mr. Butita, Mrs. Crosby, Ms. Fellers, Mr. Gurl, Mrs. Gorel, Mr. Hoffman, Mr. McCarthy. Mr. Chairman, that's 18 yes and 2 board members absent.
Very good. The ordinance has been approved. Mr. Salgado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our next item is, if you are following, it's item 2 on the Finance Committee. It's a resolution authorizing settlement of litigation. Diana Wiscott as administrator of the estate of Igna Pearson, deceased, versus Winnebago County, also doing business as River Bluff Nursing Home, and I so move.
Motion to approve by Mr. Salgado. Mr. Hoffman seconds that motion. Is there any discussion?
No, just want to let you know the dollar amount, that's $175,000.
Okay, very good. Is there any further discussion, board members? All right, since hearing no discussion, are there any board members opposed to that motion? Hearing and seeing none, please cast a yes for all members present. Ms. Gamau. Mr. Salgado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's two resolutions that I'd like to lump together. Number 3 and number 5, I will read them, and I'd like to move on those. So the first one is a resolution to approve the gigabyte to the desktop project Tech Energy. This is coming from ARP money. The second one is resolution awarding bid for exterior maintenance repair work for Veterans Memorial Hall. This was a CIP project already discussed and approved in the past. So I'd like to lump those together and take a vote on those two.
Very good. So you motion to approve both those resolutions by Mr. Salgado. Is there a second? Ms. Neighbor seconds that motion. Is there any discussion? Either of those resolutions?
Just real quick, those two have been vetted. They come below or at above or at that level that they projected the estimate was going to be for ARP money. So it's that dollar amount that they reported or less than that. So just want to make sure everybody's aware of that. Just real quick, the gigabyte, it's $174,947.50, and the Veterans Memorial Hall CIP is $171,700.
Very good. Any discussion on those two resolutions? Hearing and seeing none. Are there any board members opposed to approving both those resolutions? Thank you. Gamau, can you please cast a yes for all board members present? Mr. Salgado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our next item is a resolution awarding the purchase of police patrol vehicles and related equipment in the amount of $1,301,973.88, and I so move.
We have a motion to approve by Mr. Salgado, and second by Mr. McCarthy. Good to see you. Is there any discussion?
Just real quick, once again, came based on the quote at that amount, so no additional spend based on what we approved prior to phase 1 on the capital project.
Very good. Ms. Fellers.
Entirety of the amount of vehicles that were discussed on the ARP, or is this just a portion of them that were discussed when the ARP presentation was given?
And I would defer that to if there's someone here from the Sheriff's Department or Mr. Rickard can give us, or Mr. Thompson on the number of vehicles.
It's for the entire, it's the entire amount, entire fleet, but it's going to be staggered how we acquire the vehicles because of the backlog in ordering, but it's for the entire fleet.
And my second question, when was the last time that the fleet of vehicles was replaced for the Sheriff's Department? I seem to remember, I believe this is the third time in 7 years.
Tammy?
Tammy, you want to come forward? And Mr. Chief Barcelona? Yeah, just stand up and come towards.
If I may, Mr. Chairman,
Sure.
I just want to, because they won't be able to hear. October 2016, Mr. Barcelona mentioned, was the last time the fleet was obviously bought. There's a couple of them that are over 100,000, 200,000 miles over. One of the concerns, and just be specific, Mr. McDonald brought up, and I believe Mr. Butita in the past, about staggering, the fleet instead of just buying in a lump sum. That was one of the comments, requesting the sheriff's department to do it going forward on that, just to make sure that we don't have to go out at one time and 1.3 million, whatever it is, and change. So that's for that piece. But I just wanted to put that on the record so they could hear.
Thank you. Ms. Red and then Ms. Goro.
Thank you, Chairman. Once we get the new cars in, what will we be doing with the old ones?
Question is about when you get the new cars, what would you be doing with the old vehicles? Ms. Red?
Thank you.
Mr.
I'm a little confused because if you get in 22 new vehicles, you're going to keep the old ones as well?
Mr. Barcelona, Chief
can't hear
Barcelona,
you
could you
very
come
well.
to a microphone? Repeat your question, Ms. Red?
Yes. If we get in 22 new vehicles, what are you going to do with the 22 old ones?
Some of them, most of them will get stripped and auctioned, and that money goes back into the general fund.
Oh.
So some of them will get repurposed, and we'll get rid of the older ones that are in the jail. The 2009 vehicles that we're using, and we'll repurpose them for that. They're still 2017s. The 2009s and the 2013 vehicles are getting up there. So we will repurpose some of the vehicles for that use. And a couple of all 22 vehicles aren't patrol vehicles. A couple of them are for administration, where there's old vehicles in there. So what will happen with those administration vehicles is they'll get auctioned or repurposed into another area, and wherever we repurpose those, if something's older, then we'll auction that. So we offset some of that with auction. It just depends. I have to reevaluate. We have over 110 vehicles in the sheriff's department, so you have to reevaluate, and it's kind of a process. Once we get everything in, once we get the vehicles in at the dealership, they still have to be upfitted with all the equipment. So we're not looking at getting this rotation into service until probably March at the earliest. So once that comes in, we'll reevaluate. We just had another vehicle that we took out of service from a accident, so because it's not serviceable and they can't repair it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Ms. Goro and then Mr. Schultz.
Thank you. I just wanted to know that does the amount of buying these also include getting them all new equipment in them. It all has to be transferred over. Does that amount include that amount?
Yes, it does.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Corral. Mr. Schultz?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In the timing of payment versus delivery, will we have to pay the $1.3 million up front, or will we pay for the vehicles as they are delivered to us?
Mr. Burns?
Upon
Chief?
delivery.
Thank you. Thank you,
Some
Mr.
of
Schultz.
let me just say, some of the equipment that'll come in, like the computers and things like that, will come in probably before the vehicles. But as far as like that equipment would be paid for when we receive it. We won't pay for anything until we receive it. So like some of the computer equipment, radar units and things like that, we'll order. And once we receive that, we'll get the invoice and that'll be paid. But as far as the vehicle price itself and the upfit costs and everything, that won't be paid until we get the vehicle.
Thank you. Mrs. Fellers?
Questions? Are any of the vehicles hybrid vehicles, or are they exclusively gasoline vehicles? And the second question is, you mentioned that because of our relationship with the dealership that we were getting one model year at the previous model year's price. Were there multiple bids sent out to multiple dealerships or only this dealership?
So it's a good question. There's a couple of different phases, a couple of administration vehicles. So I'm going to try to explain this. So this dealership state bid contract, that we're getting a majority of the vehicles. Some of the detective vehicles are coming from Rock River Ford, and they took bids from there because they're not state contract. And to answer your question on hybrids, we looked into hybrids. They're about $5,000, $4,000 to $5,000 more per vehicle. And really, they're untested in the department, so I don't want to make a big purchase like that knowing what we're going to get into. However, what we are doing is we are ordering one hybrid for the village, one of our contract agencies, the Village of McChesney Park. They're going to order one of those, and we're going to test those and see, because there's mixed reviews on those. So I don't want to get something that's may or may not be reliable when we already know the gas works. So that has been looked into. And as far as full electric vehicles, if that question comes up, those actually just got sent to the Michigan State Police. They do all the testing for police vehicles. Ford actually just recently, when I say recently, I think within the last 2 weeks, sent them to Michigan State Police, and they are still working out that to make it a full police package. That hasn't been perfected yet, and they're a long way off. That probably won't be perfected until about 2030, projected. So that's been looked into as well. And the alternative would be Chevy Tahoes, which we would all love to have, but the price tag's a little bit too much for us. So we're trying to be a little wise on the spending with that too. So there's not a whole lot of options for police package vehicles, and really it's Ford or Chevy. There's Dodge too, but those, the research and all the testing on that is not what we want, and it would probably end up costing us more money at the end of the day.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Fellers. Mr. Arena?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to make sure everyone's clear to Ms. Fellers' earlier question about, is this the entire purchase? So this is the entire purchase for this year. Next year, there'll be another group of vehicles purchased again with our funds. That's correct, right? So we should all expect that to see that again next year, just so we're all clear on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Arena. Any other questions, discussion on this resolution? Mr. Salgado, anything further on the resolution? Nope. Okay, thank you. So are there any board members opposed to the resolution to approve the resolution? All right, seeing none, please cast a yes vote for all members present. Mr. Salgado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the next 4, 6 through 10, I'd like to take into a group, and these are all related to the fiscal year 2022. They're budget ordinances that obviously need to be approved prior to us approving our budget ordinance, our annual appropriation ordinance. So I'd like to take 6 through 10 and get a vote on. I'll read them in, and then we can have discussion, anything like that.
Mr. Thompson keeps raising his
Yes.
hand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, it's 6 through 11. Number 11 is the approval of budget ordinance, motor fuel tax, and federal aid match funds to be laid over.
Yeah, I was gonna do that one separate, but
Oh, you
we can lump them. No worries.
Okay.
The only reason being is that they're just transferring money to increase their fund balance. That's why I wanted to do it separately.
Oh, that's
but
fine.
those are to be laid over today, but I'd like to suspend the rules. So let me read them in first. I'll suspend the rules, and if we can vote on those today. So the first one is a approval budget ordinance coroner for fiscal year 2022. That's to be laid over in the amount of $70,000. The second one is approval of budget ordinance general fund revenue for fiscal year 2022. That's to be laid over in the amount of $160,000. The next one is a budget ordinance Memorial Hall for fiscal year 2022. That's to be laid over in the amount of $36,626. The next one's approval of budget ordinance point click care for fiscal year 2022, and that's to be laid over in the amount of $160,000. And then the next one is approval of budget ordinance state's attorney for fiscal year 2022. That's to be laid over in the amount of $90,000. And so I would like to move and suspend the rules and get those voted on today.
Very good. So there's a motion to suspend the rules from 6 through 10. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Is there a second? Ms. Crosby seconds that motion. Mr. Salgado, any
So
discussion?
I'm going to give the floor to Mr. Rickard if he wants to add context to this. We discussed about this in the Finance Committee already. That's why it's coming before the whole county board. But I don't know if he wants to shed some more light, give some context of from where we passed the annual appropriation ordinance to now where we're at. So just wanted to give him the floor if he wants to make any comments.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Salgado. As you recall, we had passed a budget for finance. We also had a committee of the whole. We produced a binder for you of the budget, which is that big thick document you have in a 3-ring binder. And since laying this document over, and this is a normal part of the budgetary process, we'll have a couple of adjustments, or in this case, we have 6 through 10 plus 11, those adjustments that we make requests in making. And I'll go through each of those budget adjustments just so you understand what's going on. First and foremost, we'll start with the coroner's budget. Through the course of our review, it was determined that there was a need for a chief deputy in the coroner's office and to provide funding for that. The current coroner did not allocate his budget for that and eliminated that position, and we feel at this time it's an appropriate amount to lay in the budget for consideration for that office. The next budget ordinance is an adjustment as we go through the budgetary process and refine our numbers, particularly on the revenue side. We've made some minor adjustments with revenue, which is reflected in that ordinance. It's an adjustment of about $160,000 to the positive in revenue that we're projecting. The next one is a minor adjustment to Memorial Hall, mainly to address the staffing issue with a part-time employee to make sure we maintain a competitive salary for that office, that department, and ensure that we can hang on to a valued employee in that position. Next, we have a budget adjustment for Point Click Care. This is an ARP-funded project, but because of the timing of the ARP project, we have to push that over into the next budget. So there's an adjustment to fund that ARP project in next year's 2022 budget. Next, the state's attorney's office has a need for an adjustment for legal services of $90,000 related to legal services currently needed by the state's attorney for labor negotiations. So there's an allotment there to meet that need for his office. Finally, there's another one, which will be number 11, that will be addressed separately, is an adjustment with the motor fuel tax budget. And we have the director of the transportation department here, and he could speak in more detail on that request.
All right, thank you very much. And so I don't know if, did we vote on the suspension?
Not yet.
Okay. Then I'll just wait.
So, having heard the discussion, are there any board members opposed to the suspension of rules for items 6 through 10? Okay, Madam Clerk, please cast a yes. Are all members present? They're all in favor of the suspension. Yes.
Can I, before we do that, can I move to a motion to approve 6 through 10?
Yeah, so the rules have been suspended.
So I motion to approve items 6 through 10 as reported.
Okay, we have a motion to approve the suspended resolutions,
Yes,
ordinances.
the budget ordinances 6 through 10.
Very good. We have a second by Ms. Fellers and Mr. Neighbors. Is there any discussion? Ms. Red?
Thank you, Chairman. And I'm not sure if this is the correct place to ask this question, but what will be the process of hiring that chief deputy coroner? I think I asked that question yesterday, and I was supposed to get an answer. I haven't got it yet.
So we just got kind of an opinion from the state's attorney this morning, and we wanted to discuss that further with the state's attorney in an upcoming meeting, maybe tomorrow.
Okay.
So we're not conclusive yet, but we did get a legal opinion with some options for that position.
It's just that I'm always concerned about diversity.
Yes.
And we're back to where we used to be on that 5th floor. And I would like to see some diversity in that office.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So we'll get you that answer as soon as we have a plan in place. Yes, Ms. Fellers.
Intended to be a temporary position, or is it a position which would be a permanent position?
It's intended to be a permanent position within the department.
Okay. But we'll have more information coming forward the next few days. All right, any other discussion? 6 through 10? All right, Clerk Kamal, can you please call the roll?
Mr. Neighbors. Mrs. Red. Mr. Salgado.
Yes.
Mr. Schultz. Mr. Tassoni. Mr. Webster. Mr. Westcott. Mr. Arena. Mr. Billich. Mr. Booker. Mr. Butita. Mrs. Crosby. Ms. Fellers. Mr. Gurl. Mrs. Gorel. Mr. Hoffman. Mr. McCarthy. Mr. McDonald. Mr. Chairman, that is 18 board members yes, 2 board members absent.
Very good. Thank you. All items have been approved. Mr. Salgado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now we're on item 11. It's approval of budget ordinance, motor fuel tax, federal aid match funds. This is to be laid over. I'd like to suspend the rules and vote on this today.
We have a motion to suspend the rules by Mr. Salgado. Do we have a second? Ms. Fellers seconds the motion. Any discussion, Mr. Salgado? Nope. Any discussion? Mr. Arena?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Was this sent out in an amended version of the packet? Because I'm not seeing it in here. It is?
Amendment to the package.
Is the language of the ordinance in the amended package? Because that's what I was looking for and don't see.
Is it in the packet? The amendment?
It should be right in the packet, the amended packet.
Okay. When was it sent?
We'll get to the bottom of it, Mr. Arena here.
So what is it?
It was sent out on Tuesday.
Okay, I see it. Thank you.
Found it?
I found the revised.
Okay. Is there any other questions on the suspension of rules? Are there any board members opposed to the motion to suspend? Hearing none, please cast a yes for all members present to approve the suspension. Mr. Salgado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I move to approve budget ordinance, motor fuel tax, and federal aid match funds.
Very good. And a motion to approve, and second by Mr. Hoffman. So we have the motion in front of you to approve the budget ordinance for motor fuel tax and federal aid match funds. Are there any questions?
So I'd like to just give the floor to Mr. Molina just to explain what happened here, why, we're reducing some of that, and, so I'll give him the floor.
Mr. Molina.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Salgado. This is, we had to make some adjustments so that, in short, our motor fuel tax fund was getting a little too low, towards the end of fiscal year 2022. So, for instance, one of the things that we did, the Baxter Road project is completed, but when we first submitted the budget, we had $500,000 of MFT funds to be spent in 2022. That project is complete, so now we don't have to do that. So that's one of the items. Another item is, we were moving Latham Road resurfacing. We are moving it again from MFT to Rebuild Illinois funds, just again to bring the motor fuel tax up. We are delaying engineering on one project. That's the Roscoe Road Bridge. That would give us about $100,000 of motor fuel tax. And the reason for that delay is because the federal funds are not going to be available until 2026, 2027. And then also we moved for engineering. We moved $100,000 from motor fuel tax to federal aid match. So those are the main items that or adjustment that we made to the budget.
Very good.
And those are all reductions, just so everybody knows.
Very good. Is there any further questions? Hearing none. Clerk Gamal, can you please call the roll?
Mrs. Red, Mr. Salgado,
Yes.
Mr. Schultz, Mr. Tassoni, Mr. Webster, Mr. Westcott, Mr. Arena, Mr. Billich, Mr. Booker, Mr. Butita, Mrs. Crosby, Ms. Fellers, Mr. Gurl, Mrs. Gorel, Mr. Hoffman, Mr. McCarthy, Mr. McDonald, Mr. Neighbors. Mr. Chairman, that is 17 board members yes and 3 absent.
Very good. Budget ordinance has been approved.
Thank you
Mr.
very much.
Salgado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Everybody got the mental health tax from Mr. Neighbors. Just so you're aware, Mr. Rickert, this has been taken into account based on their submission for their budget, correct? I just want to be clear and transparent as we can.
I believe they were allocated 15 million, so that
is
should
correct.
be close, fairly close.
Yeah, I just want to be coming from the CFO. I know Mr. Neighbors sent this over to me. I forwarded it to Mr. Rickert. I asked Mr. Rickert, is this within their fund reserves, this 15 million? He agreed that yes, it's part of it. So that was taken into account from what this is. So what this is just the breakout for everybody's sake from Mr. Neighbors if he wants to speak on it, but it just breaks everything out for you. The first is just a summary, what equates to that 15 million, where the expenses are going. One of the questions that Mr. Tassoni asked, which was a really good question, was, I don't see any personnel. Well, there aren't any personnel. It's Regional Plan 1 is really doing the outsourcing for them. And then obviously they're contracting with Rosecrans, whoever, when the RFQs come out, they award those. So that's how that's being paid out. So the board members don't get any compensation of that fact, but just so everybody's aware, why is there any personnel? There isn't, because everything's outsourced. So just so everybody is aware. But yes, this is just for your, to be transparent. Mr. Neighbor said, you want, I said, yes, please, if we can get a copy so everybody can dissect it, and if they have questions, they can certainly ask.
Mr. Arena.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the number 43,155, contract staff, non-medical, that's the fee for Region 1. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So it's going up $100,000. What's the reason for that increase? I'm sorry, what?
Yeah, we would have to ask
I don't
for.
if you want, I can have them come in the next session so they can answer the question.
Who puts the budget together, this budget?
Jason Holcomb.
So Region 1 puts together the budget?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, I'd like to understand why $100,000 increase for year to year. Thank you.
Right. My assumption, though, is
Thank you.
you're going from 8 million to 15 million. So the warding, the tracking, all that is done by regional plan. I'm just assuming, I'm not justifying why the increase, but my only assumption is that, there's going to be additional, support for that to monitor and all that.
Because we're going from a half a year to a full year.
So, but we'll get the answers for you to have them come in, and we'll ask those questions. But I don't want to speak on their behalf, but that's just looking at it from my assumption. But those are valid questions.
Ms. Goro.
Year to a full year. When they all started and got everything together, they only had a half a year to work with. So now this is reflecting a full year. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Goro.
Right, and I just wanted to be transparent as much as possible, so everybody knew that what the budget was, and obviously on that aspect, and that's part of the budget that we have here. So I just wanted to be as transparent, and thank you to Mr. Neighbors for actually sending that information over to us. So Mr. Schultz has a question.
Mr. Schultz.
Chairman, this is part of the county budget. Is that correct, Mr. Rickard?
That is correct.
Okay. I think, Mr. Neighbors probably knows this, that this matches up with the detailed presentation of numbers that you gave us as far as who was awarded contracts in this next year, that the $15 million is...
8 million something this year. We're expected to give awards to around 15 million.
So I do think that we've seen information that lines up with this dollar amount of the rounded $15 million. I do think, just for future reference, Mr. Rickard, that we should get this in the 3-ring binder, the big book, when it's brought in initially, instead of the night that we're voting on the budget.
Thank you, Mr. Schultz. I'll make note of that.
Ms. Crosby.
And folks to speak into the microphone because I'm having a hard time hearing. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Crosby. Paul?
Thank you. So if this is part of the budget we're voting on tonight, these breakouts weren't available to us before. I am concerned about this increase. We questioned in detail why the courts had a $100,000 increase. Here we've got, a prior budget of 160 and now it's 260. So by voting on it tonight as part of our budget, are we approving this?
That is correct.
Right. So,
just to be clear, this was already embedded in the budget, right? Now, this information was not available until Mr. Neighbors said, hey, I don't know, how long was that, 3 weeks ago? He said, hey, I have the budget that Mr. Rickard and their team, I said, please send it out, because some folks might want to know the details that are involved with it, but this was already embedded in the binder itself, not the detail of all the description that you see here, but the request of that. Mr. Rickert, if you want to, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but that's my understanding for that.
Thank you, Mr. Salgado. It's actually broken out in detail by Munis as page 193 of your three-ring binder. What this is another report generated by the Mental Health Board giving further detail of that breakout. But the breakout by line is in your three-ring binder, page 193.
And I did ask Mr. Rickert when Mr. Neighbors sent me the information. I forwarded it to Mr. Rickert. I said, is this what is in the reserves? Is this what would account for that? Are we in line? Are they asking more than, you know, their reserves are in? Where are we at on that? And he, you know, responded that, yes, that is within their budget.
Well, no, I get what you're saying, but just to be clear, the fact that the administration of this fund is going up by a significant amount was not clearly disclosed prior to tonight. Is that correct?
Prior to tonight?
It was in the three-ring binder, or was
Yes,
not?
it was.
You look, if you turn to page not that report, that's not generated by us.
Okay.
Page 193 is what we have generated in Munis, which if you match the documents up, what you're seeing here generated is a little bit more detail, but it is broken out by line item on page 193 and has been in the three-ring binder.
Okay, so this line item that says, that's numbered 43155, showing 159,000 up to 260, that was in our binder.
No, it wouldn't be in your binder. It would be the 15.
Right.
Yes, that is correct,
just the gross amount.
Mr.
And for
Arena.
transparency,
That is in there.
because it is an outside entity that they're the ones that develop the budget, and they come to us, propose this is what it is. So just to give you some context, last year when the budget was going on, and Mr. Chapman, I believe, you know, they wanted a whole $12 million, right? My question was, when I met with the board, and I said, okay, all right, realistically, you're going to spend $12 million. There's just no way. You got to ramp up, you know, et cetera, for awarding whatever they were going to do. So we cut their budget by from 12 to $8 million, right? So this year, similar situation. You know, they presented their numbers. Mr. Rickert took into account, he looked at the reserves and assumed that that's where we were at. So that's just to give context. I understand 100% of your concerns, and on that aspect, I'm just giving you contextual context on that.
So if I could follow up, Mr. Neighbors did show me that it is spelled out as it is on this page in our budget book, but it doesn't really elaborate on what's going on there.
Correct.
So what I think we all need to pay attention to is that an outside organization who created this budget gave themselves a $100,000 increase in their pay for the services, and we really don't know why. And that, in my mind, is us losing a necessary amount of control over spending in this process. Now, to be fair, it was buried in there, and I wish I had noticed it sooner to ask, but I'm still very troubled by that, because it's a lot of money, a lot of extra money being taken without us knowing why.
And I mean, I'm not trying to argue with you, Mr. Arena. It is their money, their taxing money. We oversee it because we collect the funds on that. We've had this discussion about who makes the decisions. They have their board. They make their decisions. Obviously, it's not Mr. Holcomb or whatever his name is at the regional plan coming up with the budget. He proposes to the board. Board votes on it. and says, yes, we agree, this is the number that, we want to, these are our objectives, these are our goals for this year, which is kind of spelled out on there. I'm not, like I said, I'm not speaking on their behalf, right? But it's one of those discussions that, are we really in control of their money, or are they in control of their money? We're collecting the tax levy, the sales tax from it. So that's why that's our control for us, right? We can push back and say, like last year, they wanted $12 million. Question is like, all right, are you really going to spend $12 million if you're going to ramp up? What's the process going to be, right? So there was some pushback on that, right? Now they're up and running. They came back and reported, right, on the awardees, what they're doing on that aspect of it. There are concerns about, like, I believe the website last year, there's questions about that. There's questions about, now about the, regional plan going from 159 to 260. Those are fair questions, and they should come in and explain that to us. I just wanted to provide this information to everyone, to be transparent, to understand where the numbers came from. They have a plan in here. I reviewed it. They document like everything from that aspect of it, but I just wanted to make sure that everybody had this information. So it wasn't like you said, buried in the numbers. I just wanted to make sure everybody had this information available. If not, it wouldn't have been included, because this comes out of their accounting system, I'm assuming, Mr. Neighbors. This is where it came from. And so, as transparency as much as we can, because it is $15 million is a huge dollar sum of money. So just wanted to have everybody to have this, and so for their information on that.
Ms. Gorel, then Mr. McDonald.
Mr. Chairman, we have to remember too, we are the pass-through. That's not our money. The state passes it through us, the county, to this organization. And we have to remember that last year they were working on half a budget, and this year they'll be working on a full budget. So it's understandable that the prices will be double of what it was last year, since it was only a half a year. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gorel. Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Salgado, you keep saying in an effort to be transparent, we got this. To get it 10 minutes before this meeting, I think it's an attempt at transparency, but it's not really transparent to me. Thank you.
I mean, I'll just once again respond politely. It's in the budget. This came from them, and I'm providing this. We wouldn't have them if we audited them or asked for this information, right? So that's where I'm trying to be as transparent as I can. Now, whether it's 10 minutes, whether it's 2 weeks ago, a month ago, we can debate about the time aspect of it, but just wanted to bring it. I didn't think it was going to be a huge controversy, but certainly we will try to get this information to you guys on a more timely manner.
Okay, Mr. Neighbors.
I just, and in defense, I see all the budget material in this big binder, and I know we've worked with the nursing home, we worked with the health department and other organizations, and their detailed budgets is not as detailed as this in there. So it is like what's in this book is perfectly fine. And if we didn't bring this tonight, the same questions will be asked just from what's in this book, but we just gave a more extensive detail, and I don't understand the big issue.
Mr. Arena.
I agree with what Mr. Neighbors just said, and Mr. Salgado pointed out, the money is allocated by the Mental Health Board, and it's their, we're the final, I guess, approval process of spending these dollars. What I just hope that we all pay attention to over time is that we don't have a slow siphoning off of some of this money, which all should be going to serve people with mental health issues. So I'd hate to see what's 260 this year become 360 next year, and then 460, and there's a little bit more here and a little bit more there year in, year out. That needs to be controlled so that we ensure that every penny that can go to serve people with mental health issues does. And I don't know that this $100,000 shifting over to administration is necessary. And, you know, but Mr. Neighbors is right. It was in the budget. He showed it to me. It was there. It's just now that it's come to our attention, I just would encourage all of us to pay attention moving forward to these other costs associated with this, the expenditures of these mental health dollars. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Salgado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So our last piece of item is the annual appropriation ordinance that was laid over September 9th, 2021 meeting. I'd like to motion that in and amend it. So I'll bring it in, put it on the floor. I'll amend it based on what we just approved on the budget ordinances. So I move to approve the annual appropriation ordinance, and I so move.
A motion to approve the ordinance. Do I have a second? Ms. Crosby seconds the motion. Mr. Salgado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'd like to amend the annual appropriation from the September 2nd meeting, September 9th meeting, to include items 6 through 11 that we just approved, which is the approval of budget ordinance for the coroner fiscal year 2022, approval of the budget ordinance general revenue for fiscal year 2022, approve of the budget ordinance Memorial Hall fiscal year 2022, approval of the budget ordinance Point Click Care for fiscal year 2022, approval of the budget ordinance State's Attorney for fiscal year 2022, and the approval budget ordinance of the motor fuel tax and federal aid match funds. And that's my amendment, to include those as the amended annual appropriation ordinance.
Okay, is there a second to that amendment? Mr. Village seconds the motion to amend as stated by Mr. Salgado. Is there any discussion? Yes. Is there any discussion on the amendment? Being amended, hearing none, can you please cast the yes votes for all members present? So the item is before you. Mr. Salgado.
Yes, so I move to approve the annual, as amended, the annual appropriation ordinance.
Very good. So there's a motion, a second by Mr. Westcott. Is there any discussion? Mr. Webster.
Yeah, just one question. Items 6 through 11 there, I'm just doing a rough numbers running in my head there. My head hurts. Anyways, those numbers come up to about $500,000. Is that a plus or a minus?
And I will defer that to Mr. Rickard to give us context on where we end up.
The net, because item 11 is just a simple reduction in the special revenue fund, it's not going to affect the general fund. The net impact in the budget is zero. When you account for the revenue allocations and the adjustments in revenue, you will still have a net $10,000 increase over last year's fund equity with this year's fund equity. So it'll be a balanced budget and meeting the guidelines and parameters set out by the board.
Let's get item 6 through 10, run around 500,000. Oh.
When you aggregate them all up, it's flat.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Okay, hearing, well, Ms. Fellers.
I just wanted to point out that this budget has been presented to us and to taxpayers as being a balanced budget. And I know that I'm a freshman on the board, and I know that things are usually, it is usual for amendments to come through, but I think it's important that we acknowledge that there will be amendments to this budget that are coming through. For example, this budget does not take into account any of the payroll increases that we're going to see with the current negotiations we have going on with our corrections officers and our employees at the nursing home. It doesn't take into account additional monies that have been allocated to the Sheriff's Department, which I'm sure will be coming through for additional budget items. This budget also takes away money from hard infrastructure projects, such as roads and bridges, which are in desperate need of repair in Winnebago County. And so I just want to make sure that as we vote for this budget, that we all remember that this isn't a hard budget. This is just simply a guideline, and that I would discourage anyone from saying that it's a balanced budget.
Thank you, Ms. Fellers. Mr. Ricker, do you have a comment?
I believe at prior meetings with the Committee of the Whole, Ms. Fellers makes some very valid points about concerns we have with labor negotiations and some other key factors we have to consider in the long run. But for now, this is the budget, and a lot of time and effort with staff and working with the departments and elected officials went into that.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Mr. Tassoni.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I guess for next year's budget, I'd like, when I see decreases as well, but increases in personnel throughout the departments as well as decreases, I'd like to just get a synopsis of what those increases or decreases reflect. I know someone in the finance department got a packet. I was able to see it a little bit, but I never received any detail on that.
Well noted. Mr. Ricker.
Requested by a board member to send out the narrative that was provided to finance. That was shot out to all the board members last week.
Very good. Any other discussion?
Yes, if I may, Mr.
Yes.
Chairman. I just want to be crystal clear as well too. When we say it's balanced budget, that is correct. It's not, right? But from my perspective, it's always a difficult decision when we're up here in front of the podium. Mr. Schultz always puts his hands up and says, we can't kick the can down the road. And unfortunately, it becomes a controversial / uncomfortable discussion of where do we cut, right? And so, we try to do the best we can because we got to pass a budget, right? If not, we would not pass a budget, right? From my perspective, we'd be, as some governors in prior administrations throughout, where they go without a budget at all, or whatever the case may be. So we try really hard as much as we can. Kudos to the finance team that they have working diligently on this. But until we start making those decisions, right, and holding departments accountable. One perfect example, I don't mean to put them on the spot, but we had a $681,000 budget amendment in the Sheriff's Department. Not saying that it was caused, it could have been COVID, it could have been whatever. They broke it down for us legitimately. They discussed about it. They gave us their terms. But unfortunately, if we don't step up and start making decisions like that, where we need to make reductions, because typically in government, property taxes versus services, right? And so if your sales or your sales tax and your revenue continues to dwindle, then the only way that you can do it, either find alternative funding or, you start to reduce. That's really all the levers that we have from that perspective, right? And, I've been on the board, tried really hard to hold people accountable and stuff like that. But unfortunately, some people look at it, public safety is more important than other things. This is why I think it's very critical, and I've said this, and I gave props to Mr. Shirelli and his team when they look at the ARP. People were saying, well, it should go to communities. It should go to this, it should go to that. That money should go there. But we have an objective, a strategic plan on where the county should go. We all decided on that. We said, these are the pillars that we want to. So therefore, that's where the money should go. And similar situation, if we want to go that route, I think the best way to do that and to hold us accountable is, here's a strategic plan. These are our pillars where we want to fund the money. Public safety is at the top. There is no discussion on that, right? I can't say, hey, I don't think public safety should get any money. It is a priority. Economic development is another one, right? So we can't just, we have to be smart about that. And that's the only way that we can get there is strategically planning. What are our objectives? What does this county want to do? How do they want to allocate the funds? What kind of services do we need? And move forward in that direction. But unfortunately, once again, and I say this all the time, if we want to get there, we need to take a leadership role and say, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to balance the budget, whether it's starting from zero, from scratch, and going down the road. We can certainly do that. But unfortunately, it gets very uncomfortable when services start to tap in. And when you're in front of the microphone, people, start to, say, hey, maybe step back, right? And that's human nature, right? But from my perspective, if we want to be a leader in that, develop a strategic plan, what we want to do, and that's how we make our decisions, because we fall back. This is what our residents want. This is what, as a county board, as elected officials that represent constituents, this is what the citizens want of Winnebago County, right? Whatever it is, the pillars. That's why I give props to Mr. Thompson, Mr. Rickard, Mr. Shirelli, in coming up with the art money, based on what does the county board think are the priorities, so we can allocate these funds. Because there's going to be people out there that are going to say, well, it should be community, it should be public safety, it should go to health, it should go here, it should go there, it should go to infrastructure, and we're never going to get anywhere on that situation, right? So they laid out phases where they can always have input on different projects that need to be done. And so that's, in a nutshell, where I think we need to head in that direction. But I think we've been trying really hard. We got lucky this year, with the funding that we received. Just wanted to throw it out there. I know I had Mr. Rickard kind of give a projection for the next 3 years, right? Because my fear is like, okay, we did great this year, but what about next year? Or what about the next year? Are we still going to be at 2.5, 2.7 come the next year? And we need to start to think about that strategically each year ahead of schedule. So I know it doesn't solve your question about balanced budget, or it's an unpopular comment, but in the end, that's what we need to do. And it gets tough, when public services and are being provided and there's disruptions and and stuff like that. So just wanted to point that out for everybody, and hopefully we can continue to move in the right direction. I think we are, with Mr. Richter and Mr. Thompson's leadership. Hopefully we can address some of the things, because one of the things is River Bluff, $2 million transfer, whatever the case may be. Those are things we got to solve, and they're unpopular topics of discussion that we have to do. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Mr. Butita.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So to Mr. Salgada's last point about River Bluff Nursing Home, this is only a balanced budget because we took $2.8 million out of host fee funds to fund the deficit at River Bluff. We're not going to have that luxury to use those funds again next year. Focus of this board next year has to be to resolve the River Bluff situation, whether it be additional revenue cuts or whatever it may be, but we need to tackle that issue in 2022. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Butita. Any other discussion? Okay, Clerk Gumbel, can you please call the roll?
Mr. Salgado,
Yes.
Mr. Schultz, Mr. Tassoni, Mr. Webster, Mr. Westcott, Mr. Arena, Mr. Billich, Mr. Booker, Mr. Butita, Mrs. Crosby, Ms. Fellers, Mr. Gurl, Mrs. Gorel, Mr. Hoffman, Mr. McCarthy, Mr. McDonald, Mr. Neighbors, Mrs. Red, Mr. Chairman, 16 yes, 2 no, and 2 absent.
Thank you, Clerk Gamo.
So real quick, I just want to thank the finance team
Yes.
and actually our finance committee as well, having good conversations in that, and thank you for being patient tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Salgado. Thank you all for all the work in the Finance Committee and administration. Thank you for everyone's hard work. Okay. So that completed the Finance Committee. I believe we have Mr. Webster, the Zoning Committee.
Thank you. Good evening. I'll try to be a little bit briefer than Jaime did. Zoning Committee has one item, it's for a read-in, to lay over. Z0521, it's a map amendment to rezone plus minus 4.28 acres in the Ag Priority District. And this is in County Board District 1, and this is in for first reading for the layover. That's all we have.
All right, thank you, Mr. Webster.
If I may, as long as I do have the soapbox here, we had a discussion the other night at caucus, and this question comes up every year at budget time, like what happens if we don't pass a budget? What are the consequences? And so I know what many of the consequences are. Most of them are related to money, of course. So at any rate, I asked Jay to give us an answer, and he turned it over to Lafa, and Lafa said, or Lafa should have some kind of an answer to us about what are the dire consequences if we didn't pass the budget tonight. Thank you.
If I just had, thank you, Chairman. If I had to sum it up, we'll be shut down. I mean, we have to pass a budget, and I'm so glad we passed it today. That's the summary.
Thank you.
I was stressed out this week
Thank
trying
you.
to figure out what would happen if we did not. But thank you all.
Thank you, Lafa. Thank you, Mr. Webster. Okay, we'll move on to Economic Development Committee. Mr. Billich.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Even though we do not have a report today, we do have a few things that are going to be coming up the pipeline. However, actually, I just wanted to give a huge shout out to Jaime and to the finance staff for doing their work on the budget today. A lot of good things were said by a lot of county board members, and we have been very good stewards of the taxpayers' dollars. So I want to continue on that good work. I just want to say thank you guys for that.
Thank you, Mr. Billich. Operation and Administrative Committee, Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Operations has got 3 resolutions for this evening. The first resolution, establishing the county holiday schedule for 2022, and I so move.
Motion to approve the holiday schedule, and Mr. Neighbor seconds, Ms. Red thirds. Is there any discussion? Ms. Fellers.
I noticed that the holiday schedule does not include June 19th, which is Juneteenth, the holiday which was made both a federal and a state holiday in 2021. Was there a reason that it's been left off of the county holiday?
Mr. Thompson, I believe, had an answer to that when we asked it first. For the Juneteenth holiday?
I didn't really have an answer for that, except I was asked what the additional cost would be. And the Human Resources Department estimated approximately $200,000 for that additional holiday. I think I was asked that question at the committee. It's not included as a holiday for next year. It would be up to the board to decide whether or not to allocate that as an additional holiday.
I would like to propose an amendment to the holiday schedule that would include Juneteenth as a holiday for the county, so that it is in alignment with state and federal holidays.
So we have amendment to the holiday schedule for June 19th, and second by Ms. Red. Any discussion, Mr. McDonald, or any board member? Mr. Arena.
So we did discuss this in committee, both Juneteenth and election day last year was mandated to be a holiday. And so we talked about what additional cost there was to the county to do it. Last year, when that was mandated by the governor, we had to do a budget amendment to pay for it. So my question now is, if we make this change to the schedule, do we then have to do a budget amendment to the budget we just passed?
Would be correct.
Okay. And I think even though I understand the importance of the holiday, I'm also sensitive to the economics of these holidays, and for that reason alone, I'd vote no on adding it to the holiday schedule. Thank you.
Mr. Tassoni.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just, my opinion is, you know, in short order here at the board, we shouldn't be deciding what the holiday schedule is going to be, and I think it should really be a part of the collective bargaining agreement.
So we have an amended holiday schedule before you to vote on. Is there any discussion on that? All in favor of the amendment to add Juneteenth? Say aye. Opposed?
No.
Okay, let's do a roll call. Clerk Gamal.
Mr. Schultz, Mr. Tassoni, Mr. Webster, Mr. Westcott, Mr. Arena, Mr. Billich, Mr. Booker, Mr. Butita, Mrs. Crosby, Ms. Fellers, Mr. Gurl, Mrs. Gorel, Mr. Hoffman, Mr. McCarthy, Mr. McDonald,
No.
Mr. Neighbors, Mrs. Red, Mr. Salgado. Mr. Chairman, 5 yes, 13 no, and 2 absent.
So the amendment fails. Okay. We move to the original motion. Okay, so we are now have a motion to approve the holiday schedule that is not amended. Is there any discussion? Ms. Gorel.
I would like to see when we do the 2023rd, that perhaps at that time we would reconsider this so that we allow in our budget for that holiday. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gorel. Ms. Red. So the motion is to approve the original holiday schedule. Yeah, okay. So you withdraw your second. Okay. Ms. Gorel, seconds. Okay. Correct.
You're seconding the original motion, Ms. Gorel?
Yeah.
Team play.
All right. So are there any board members opposed to the holiday schedule that's before you? 1, 2, 3. Okay. Any others opposed? Okay. Please cast the remainder yes. Clerk Gamal. Neighbors, Fellers, and Ms. Red, correct. Ms. Knowles. Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The second resolution is for emergency purchase of a food steamer for River Bluff Nursing Home, and I so move.
Okay, we have a motion and a second by Mr. Huffman to approve. Is there any discussion? Seeing and hearing none, are there any board members opposed to that motion to approve? All right, please cast yes votes for all members present. Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our final resolution is award bidding for Veterans Memorial Hall access and accessibility, and I so move.
Very good. Mr. McCarthy seconds, Ms. Feller seconds, and several others. Any discussion? Are there any board members opposed to that motion to approve? Seeing none, please cast a yes vote for all members present. Mr. McDonald.
That concludes the report. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. McDonald. Mr. Tassoni. There, he's on his way.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Public Works Committee brings forth 5 resolutions this evening. First item on the agenda, it's Resolution 21-030. It's a resolution authorizing the award of a bid for resurfacing Patterson Road and Pepper Street, north of Illinois Route 75, Durant Township. I would so move and speak to it as well.
Good. Motion to approve. Mr. Webster seconds. Mr. Tassoni.
This is just a no cost to the county. It's monies that are handled by the Highway Department from Village of Durant and Durant Township.
Very good. Any other discussion? Hearing and seeing none, are there any board members opposed to that motion to approve? All right, please cast all members present a yes. Mr. Tassoni.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Next item on the agenda, it's Resolution 21-031. It's a resolution authorizing the award of a bid for 2021 LED street lighting fixtures throughout the county. I would so move.
Very good. We have a motion and a second by Mr. Webster. Is there discussion? Mr. Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just curious if ComEd assisted. I know there's some available funds that were out there at one point in a pool of money for municipalities for lighting improvements. Do we get some help from ComEd or elsewhere on this one?
Mr. Molina? Tassoni?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, this is a cost of the county fund, but we expect a roughly $10,000 rebate from the program. And as far as any additional grants, or let Mr. Molina speak to that.
You are correct, Mr. Tassoni. We expect about $10,000 refund from ComEd.
Very good. Any other questions? All right. Are there any board members opposed to this resolution? Seeing none, please cast a yes vote. All members present. Mr. Tassoni.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Next item on the agenda is Resolution 21-032. It's a resolution authorizing the award of bid for the 2021 asphalt patching program. I would so move.
Very good. We have a motion to approve. Do we have a second? Mr. Webster seconds the motion. Is there any discussion? Hearing and seeing none, are there any members present opposed? Okay. Please cast a yes vote for all members present. Mr. Tassoni.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Next item is Resolution 21-033. It's a resolution awarding the purchase of a used John Deere 722D grader, and I would so move.
Motion to approve by Mr. Tassoni. Ms. Feller seconds the motion. Is there any discussion? All right, hearing and seeing none, are there any board members opposed to that motion? Seeing none, please cast a yes vote for all members present. Mr. Tassoni.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our final resolution, 21-034. It's a resolution authorizing the execution of a professional services agreement between the County of Winnebago and the Winnebago County Soil and Water Conservation District for construction site erosion and sediment control compliance administration, and I would so move.
Motion to approve and a second by Mr. Arena. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, are there any board members opposed to this resolution? Clerk, come out, please cast a yes vote to all members present. Mr. Tassoni.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That concludes our report.
Thank you. All right, we have Mr. Girl up to bat. Public Safety and Judiciary Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have one item this evening under new business, and is a resolution authorizing the chairman of the county board to execute an agreement with William Hins, Winnebago County Coroner, for voluntarily paid administrative leave. And I so move.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second by Mr. Huffman. I believe many others in the board.
I believe I need to make a motion to suspend the rules.
That's correct. So we have a motion and a second by Mr. Neighbors to suspend the rules. Is there any discussion on the suspension? Seeing none, All board members in favor of the suspension, raise your hand, please. It's unanimous. All right, the rules are suspended.
I would like to now move the resolution.
All right, now we have a motion to approve the resolution by Mr. Burl, and Ms. Feller seconds that motion. Any discussion on the resolution? Ms. Red.
What would be the process? Well, I guess I'm speaking too soon. If the person in that position cannot continue to fulfill that spot.
What would be the process?
Yes.
Ms. Red, I believe there's a lot that goes into it, like election law in the state of Illinois, about timing of when a vacancy occurs. And I also believe that, ultimately, if there's an appointment, it comes through this chairman's seat to the board for ratification. But I think there's a lot of things that go into play with that for timing. So, Ms. Vaughn, can you expound on that?
You did it perfectly, Chairman.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and we just haven't gotten that far yet, so we don't have it laid out, but it's under the election code on how the vacancy will be filled.
All right. Thank you. You're welcome.
We'll keep you posted if something happens.
If I could, we're not talking about a vacancy
No.
in the office. Are you talking about the deputy coroner, Ms. Red?
No.
You're talking about the coroner. Okay, there is no vacancy. He is on paid administrative leave, so.
I think she meant in the event.
Yeah.
In the event that,
right.
okay, sorry, forgive me.
Mr. Arena.
We can only be so lucky.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, reading the agreement, and the agreement shall terminate upon the resolution of all pending criminal cases. And resolution means one of them is a plea of guilty, so, or a conviction. So this administrative leave terminates if he's found guilty or he pleads guilty, then what happens? So if he's found innocent, I get it, he's back on the job. But does the law automatically remove the coroner if he's found guilty?
No, then, thank you, Chairman. That's when we would have to follow the election code on how to fill the vacancy. Because if he's convicted, then he would not be able to be the elected official.
Okay, so as soon as an elected official is convicted of a crime, they're no longer in office.
Correct. I don't have the certain statute before me, but yes.
It applies to anybody, us, and every elected official, right?
As far as I know.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I understood that. Thank you.
Any other questions? What we have before us is the resolution authorizing the chairman of the county board to execute an agreement with Mr. Hintz, Winnebago County Coroner, for the voluntary paid administrative leave. Any further discussion? All right. Are there any board members opposed to that resolution? Seeing none, please cast a yes vote for all members present. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Concludes our report.
Thank you, Mr. Girl. Okay, so we already completed unfinished business except for the appointment. So before we have for the River Bluff Advisory Board, we have board member Jaime Salgado. He is up for appointment to that board, advisory board, is Ms. Gorel. We have a motion to approve that by Ms. Gorel. Do I have a second? Ms. Red seconds that motion. Is there any discussion? Are there any board members opposed to the motion to approve? Seeing none, please cast a yes vote for all members present. Thank you. All right, thank you. Now we'll move on. Mr. Salgado, did you abstain? Yeah, he did abstain. So not all board members present. There was one abstention. Thank you, Ms. Vaughn. I think it's time for an M&M. All right. Now we have announcements and communications. Ms. Clerk Gummow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The items listed below are received as correspondence.
Very good. Well, thank you to the staff. Thank you to all the department heads. Thank you to the Finance Committee members, the county board members. Ms. Crosby.
I just want to thank the staffer who put together our schedule through March. I really do appreciate it, and nicely done. So nice. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Crosby.
Thank you, Mrs. Crosby. Yes, at your stations tonight, it was recommended at last month's board meeting that rather than having to stop in and pick up your mail, the mail was at your station this evening. We'll continue to do that, and the staff did come up with a schedule for committees and board meetings. So thank you.
Very good. Is there any other board member comments? Announcements? Mr. Webster. Mr. Webster wants to leave. Mr. Westcott seconds that motion to leave. All members present want to leave? Say yes. No? All right, we're leaving.